Okay, picture this. It's February 28th, 2026. A shadow war that's been simmering for years suddenly boils over into a full-blown conflict. Now, instead of just looking at the tanks and planes, we're going to peel back the curtain and analyze this thing through the lens of game theory. We want to understand the why behind the chaos. And it all starts with this one big nagging puzzle. It really is a fundamental question, isn't it? I mean, we all know war is absolutely horrific. It costs countless lives, it shatters economies, it destroys everything in its path. So why does it even happen? Why wouldn't smart, rational leaders always choose a peaceful deal that would leave both sides better off than fighting? Well, it turns out academics have a name for this exact problem, the war's inefficiency puzzle. And that's the core paradox we're really digging into today. Because in theory, there should pretty much always be some kind of deal that's better than the sheer destruction of war. And yet, here we are. Wars keep happening. This quote really boils it down perfectly. You can think of a war kind of like a massive, deadly lawsuit. Going to trial is incredibly expensive for both sides. That's why most of the time, it's way better for everyone to just settle out of court. War is the exact same logic, just with infinitely higher stakes. So, to really get why that peaceful settlement fails, we first have to understand the logic of how it's supposed to work. And that brings us to a really key idea in game theory, the bargaining range. So imagine this line represents all the possible ways a dispute could end. The crazy thing is, the enormous cost of war for each side, in lives, money, resources, it actually creates this space for a deal right there in the middle that both countries should rationally prefer to fighting. Any deal inside this range is better for everyone than going to war. And this right here just lays it all out. A successful bargain? That's a win-win. Simple. Both sides get to avoid the devastating costs of a conflict. But war? War is fundamentally a lose-lose. Even the country that wins pays such an incredibly high price that a negotiated deal would have almost always been the smarter choice. Okay, so now let's take all this theory and apply it to our case study, a high-stakes, hypothetical conflict in Iran in 2026. So here's the setup. This conflict doesn't just pop up out of nowhere. First, you have major internal protests shaking Iran. Then, bam, February 28th, the U.S. and Israel launch something called Operation Epic Fury. The very next day, those strikes lead to what's called a functional decapitation of the Iranian state. The Ayatollah himself is killed. And then, just a couple of weeks later, a key official who might have been able to negotiate a peace deal, Ali Larijani, is also killed. So why couldn't they find a deal inside that bargaining range we were just talking about? Well, this is where a huge obstacle comes into play, the commitment problem. With the Iranian leadership totally shattered and mistrust at an absolute fever pitch, how can either side actually believe the other will honor a peace treaty down the road? The short answer is they can't. And when you have zero trust, you get zero deals. This total breakdown in bargaining leaves us with really just 3 potential paths forward. So let's take a look at what the game theory models suggest are the most likely outcomes of this mess. All right, this table right here, this is the real heart of our whole analysis. It lays out 3 possible scenarios. The most likely one with high odds is this mutual attrition stalemate, and it's driven by that very same commitment problem. The next most likely, with medium odds, is a negotiated freeze, which is basically forced by overwhelming economic pain. And finally, the least likely, but by far the most dangerous, is a total regional rupture. Okay, let's break down that first scenario, the one that's most likely to happen, mutual attrition. This isn't about one side winning a glorious victory. Oh no, this is about a long, painful, grinding stalemate, one that looks a lot like the Iran-Iraq war back in the 80s. So, in this future, both sides are just strong enough to stop the other from winning, but neither is strong enough to actually land a knockout blow. And the result? Sky-high energy prices for a long time, global inflation, and just immense human and material suffering for everybody involved. So here's the bottom line. Who wins? Nobody. There is no winner. Both sides lose, big time. So, the second path is what we're calling a negotiated freeze. This is what happens when the pain of that stalemate, especially the economic pain, just becomes too much to handle. Now, in this freeze scenario, things get interesting. The winner is actually the global economy, and the loser is Iran. Just imagine oil prices hitting $170, maybe even $200 a barrel. The pressure from the rest of the world becomes unbearable, forcing Iran to accept some kind of feast-saving deal just to get the oil flowing again through the Strait of Hormuz. It's a lot like 1988 when Ayatollah Khamenei famously said he had to drink the cup of poison to end the war with Iraq. He was forced into a deal from a position of weakness. And now we have to talk about the least likely but the most catastrophic outcome: a complete and total regional meltdown. This is the absolute nightmare scenario, the Syria model. Unclear war aims, uncontrolled escalation. It all leads to the complete collapse of the Iranian state. And this isn't some clean victory. It's a power vacuum that gets filled by civil war, creating massive refugee crises and permanently wrecking the world's energy supply. In this scenario, the only winner is chaos itself, and absolutely everyone else on the planet loses. So, after walking through all of these potential futures, what's the big takeaway? Well, it brings us right back to where we started this whole conversation. It all boils down to this one simple, powerful idea. War isn't really caused by a lack of peaceful options on the table. It's caused by the failure of leaders to credibly commit to one of those options. All the inefficiency, all the destruction, all the loss, it all flows from this one fundamental breakdown. And that leaves us with the final and most important question. We understand the puzzle of why these wars happen, but knowing that, what do we do about it? How do we actually build the trust and create the systems that make the bargain for peace not just possible, but credible and lasting? That, right there, is the challenge this analysis leaves us all with.